Welcome to Module 5. Still in the post-evaluation. Now we're going to introduce some new concepts. We're going to introduce the ability to create a picture, the ability to do what's called a vulnerability criticality matrices for each system, and also as a roll-up for an organization. Okay. I need to tell you up front, okay, if you have a lot of math knowledge, you're going to say, well, what's the sample set it has to be? What's that size for these numbers to work? You know what? This is a tool for your toolkit. This is a benefit from a picture standpoint. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. Is it something you can use? Absolutely. Is it fairly simple once you get the concept? Yes, it can be fairly simple as long as you don't try to read too much into it. Okay. So just be ready as we step through. Pay attention. And you will be fine, and you will get the chance to try this out in the next group exercise. So in this module, we're going to introduce the vulnerability criticality matrices, not to be confused with the stuff we did in the IEM. Those were criticality matrices, not vulnerability criticality matrices. We're also going to introduce InfoSec posture profile and InfoSec posture rating. Okay, so there's two types of matrices you're going to create. One is a system vulnerability criticality matrix, which is an SVCM, more acronyms, yes. And the other is the organizational vulnerability criticality matrix, which is the OVCM. They are two distinct matrices. One obviously focuses on system, one focuses on the organization. Now, in the IAM, we focused on the organizational level first. We created the organization's information criticality matrix first. Then we created system criticality matrices. Well, this time, we're going the other direction. We're going to start at the system side, and then we're going to roll that up into an organizational. So if you think about it, it makes a complete loop. We've gone top to bottom, bottom back to top. So we're back to the top. It's going to provide us a high-level picture. Okay? This isn't going to really help technical people. This is meant to be a management picture. This is going to give the organization a number or a set of numbers to work with. Okay? You'll see that as we step through. It helps us to prioritize the vulnerabilities. So it's going to help us to look at some things in prioritization and help with that roadmap concept of what does the organization need to do to improve their security posture. Okay. We're also going to be able to track and trend the vulnerabilities over time to see is the organization making progress toward improving security by also improving their practices, not just plugging the holes. Okay. So we'll be able to see that. Okay, this is a two-dimensional matrix that has three dimensions. Work with me on this. Okay. The first two dimensions are the information types or the critical information and the impact from the customer side. So that information criticality matrix and the system criticality matrices we did in the IAM, that's going to build the top line of these matrices. The next piece is the industry standard ratings or the vulnerabilities themselves. So down the side, we're going to be putting in the vulnerabilities. Okay, technical vulnerabilities, the majority of those are going to have CVE numbers. Some of them won't, but they'll still be technical vulnerabilities. And hey, we can also plug in organizational vulnerabilities into this matrices too. Okay, and we'll be walking through an example here shortly. The third dimension of our two-dimensional matrices is your expertise. You can make adjustments to this and make decisions in the process of building this based on your knowledge of the customer and your expertise you're bringing to the table. Okay, so you'll see that as we step through. Okay, so again, the top line is going to be built from the customer information, and the side is going to be built from the vulnerability information. What you're going to end up with is a picture. That picture is going to push everything that is high up into the upper left-hand corner. The mediums are going to kind of be in the middle, and the not so important stuff is going to be at the lower right. Plus, we're going to be able to do colors. Management likes colors, red, yellow, and green. You know, you can change it to fuchsia, purple, and chartreuse. I don't care. But, you know, the idea generally it's red, yellow, green. And management understands red, yellow, green. Red, ouch. Yellow, maybe I'm getting bruised. Green, well, when I have time, I'll get to those kind of concept. So it's going to create a picture. So we're bringing in the information from the IAM. And we're actually going to use COPS as the example for building this. And so you'll be able to see that here in a few minutes. We're bringing in the CVE ratings and customization based on you. So let's do our example of COPS. In the IAM, we use COPS as an example. We created an organizational information criticality matrix. Okay. Had 4 information types. We addressed confidentiality, integrity, and availability for those 4 information types. You remember that, right? This is our impact, high, mediums, and lows. We also had 2 systems. We had the fax system and we had the Snoop system. Okay. The fax system processed, transmitted, and or stored 3 of those information types. The Snoop system processed, transmitted, and or stored 2 of those information types after we made that update to it. Okay. So that's the system criticality matrix for fax and Snoop. Okay. So this should look familiar. Now, one of the things you're going to have to do as you're putting together your final report is you're going to have to make sure that you have unique identifiers for your vulnerabilities. That way you can track back into the actual text of the final report to read about the vulnerabilities from the matrices. You're also going to want to just do a unique identifier for each of the information types, because for our purposes here, we just need to keep track of where they are, because all the information types don't apply to every system. And so, example, 1, 2, 3, and 4 is for the big picture. Only 1, 3, and 4 are used in fax. 2 and 4 are used in Snoop. So everybody should be with me so far. This hasn't introduced anything new yet. Now what we're going to do is we are going to build the top line of our fax SVCM, System Vulnerability Criticality Matrix. So we're going to build that top line. Okay, this is CAPE. This is real easy because you've got the System Criticality Matrix for fax already. And all you do is you start out with the first information type and you go across until you hit your first high. That first high becomes the first block within the SVCM. Then you continue on until you find your next high. You just keep going. And then there, okay, our next high is actually warrants integrity. That becomes our next block. And then our next high there is warrants availability, or 4A. That becomes our next block. What we're doing is we're pushing all the highs up into the left-hand side. Then we start back up the top with the mediums. And we do the exact same thing. So our first medium is what? 1C. Criminal records confidentiality. Our next medium is 1A. That goes there. 3C is our next medium, 3I. And then, of course, it continues on until you finish. And then once you're done with the mediums, then you go back and find your lows. And, of course, that low is somewhere over here. It just ran out of space. Okay. So to build the top line, you're just going through, do all the highs first, do all the mediums next, do all the lows last. Okay. You can see already it's pushing information criticality, organizational criticality. It's letting us focus our highs in one place. So that when we look at our vulnerabilities, we'll be able to say our high impact vulnerabilities and our high impact areas are all going to be up in the upper left-hand corner. Okay. Hang with me. We still got more to go. All right. But you see how to build that top line. Everybody good with that? Okay. Now, for the side, that's where we put in our vulnerabilities. We're starting out by building it with the technical vulnerabilities. Now, you put all your highs first for that system. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have a lot of highs, or the same highs on multiple systems. Okay? where that gets taken into account, that's part of where your expertise comes into play in terms of what order you put the highs in, what order you put the mediums in, what order you put the lows in. You have to decide that. If you, again, this is part of where your expertise comes into play. If you get something that says it's a high and you know better, it's really not a high, then your expertise says you put it in the medium. Now, the thing about that, you don't want to do it too often because you need to document the fact that you made those choices and why. Understand, this is one of the last things you're going to do. These matrices are one of the last things you're going to do because you need all your analysis finished on the vulnerabilities. So then it's just a matter of pulling them all in and putting them in a chart. If you're still discovering vulnerabilities, don't do this yet. It's one of the last things to do. So the top, again, is the customer input, the customer information criticality, and the side is the vulnerabilities themselves. Now, the cool thing about this table, you can bring in IAM type of vulnerabilities or organizational vulnerabilities. We do treat them slightly differently, and you will see that. But you still have high, mediums, and lows from an organizational vulnerability perspective. So you plug these in. And again, where you actually plug them in is dependent upon your expertise. Where do they fit? So that's got to be part of your analysis in there. Okay? So we have technical vulnerabilities here, and we have organizational vulnerabilities. Now, one of the things you've got to keep in mind when you're doing your analysis of each vulnerability, okay? We know it's not a cut and paste out of the tool in terms of a description of what it is. In your analysis of vulnerability, you need to determine which impact attributes, confidentiality, integrity, and or availability, that vulnerability impacts. So when you're doing vulnerability analysis, for example, we have this CVE 2002-0571. It's an Oracle vulnerability. It has a severity of high. Okay. So in your analysis, you need to say, okay, this affects confidentiality and or integrity and or availability. And of course, if you added non-repudiation or something of that nature, which does it affect? Because we need that information as we're building that matrix too, because some of those areas may not apply if this vulnerability doesn't affect it. So part of your analysis has to be to look at that. The other part of your analysis is another concept I'm going to introduce here in a few minutes. If you're using computer network defense, CND, okay, you might be the only one that deals with that. You also, in your analysis, have to determine which of the CND areas that vulnerability affects, whether it's protect, detect, respond, or sustain. Okay. Again, we'll see that in just a minute. But in your analysis, what does it affect from a confidentiality, integrity, and availability standpoint? And maybe you need to deal with the CND, protect, detect, respond, or sustain. Okay. So what we're doing, this is facts still. We've built the top line of facts. Okay, we've got pretty collars in the top too. We've got vulnerabilities. Of course, this is truncated for presentation purposes. You're probably going to have quite a few more vulnerabilities that you're dealing with. Okay, so yeah, all your highs are here, all your mediums are here, and all your lows are here. Now notice I mentioned you need to make sure you give unique identifiers to your vulnerabilities. Notice we don't have a finding number 1. We have finding 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 9. Well, finding number 1 actually is probably in another system. Okay. And then you're also going to have some that will repeat in systems too, which we'll see here in a couple minutes. But just have unique identifiers. And then the severity level, we can see it by color, but also mark it as high, medium, or low. So that's how critical the vulnerability is. Notice we have technical vulnerability, organizational vulnerability, technical, organizational, technical. It says operational, which is also organizational, and then another technical. And that's going to be significant here in a minute. That analysis we just did as to whether something applies to confidentiality, integrity, and or availability. We take that into account. Here's that vulnerability that we had. we said it affected confidentiality and integrity, not availability. So any place that availability was blanked out. Okay? It's a not applicable block. These black boxes are blank. They're not applicable. Okay? So you're going in as you're building your matrix, and anything that's not applicable, you're going to box out. If you look at 2002-1024, the only thing it affects is availability. So it's not blanked out for availability, but blanked out for integrity and confidentiality. So that's why you do that analysis. Okay, you also build the SVCM for Snoop. Same process. Go through what are the vulnerabilities. Oh, hey, we finally found vulnerability number 1. It's in the Snoop. So that ties back. But also we had vulnerability number 3 in facts. So that's actually a repeat vulnerability. And that's why you don't have to, within your descriptions, you don't have to have the same vulnerability repeated. You just tie it back to the unique number within there. Okay, so now we get to do math. We get to weight these things. We're going to put some numbers in here to work with. Okay, so it's based on that top line, which is the predefined information types. That's that customer input. It's also based on the side, which is the vulnerability itself, which, if it's a technical vulnerability with a CVE number, has that industry analysis expertise in there. And it also looks backward through any security changes, things like that. We'll be able to use that as a tracking mechanism here in the near future. Okay. So the third piece of this is you, and you'll see how this gets plugged in there again as well. If you have a technical vulnerability from a weighting standpoint, the technical vulnerabilities, the vulnerability itself, the CVE, when it does have a CVE number, is going to be worth 2/3. Okay. The reason it was decided it's going to be 2/3 is because there's 2 factors associated with the CVE. The vulnerability itself and the likelihood of exposure. Common vulnerability and exposure. So NSA said, customer, your information is really important, but we've also got the industry backing this one up, backing the technical stuff up. And so it's going to be a 2/3 weighting for the vulnerability, 1/3 weighting for the top line or the customer impact. So what we had to do was baseline a high point and a low point. So the worst you can be is a 9. The best you can be is a 3. So if you had a low on a low, it's a 3. High on high is a 9. And so a 2/3 weighting for the vulnerability for a high would be 6. For a medium would be 4. And for a low would be 2. The top line, or the customer input, the high would be a 3, medium a 2, and the low would be a 1. Okay. So if you had high on high, it's a 9. Medium on medium is a 6. Low on low is a 3. This is just a weighting mechanism that was decided to be used. Okay. So this is for technical vulnerabilities. Now, if you have a non-technical vulnerability, this is like our organizational findings, our IAM type of findings. Because we don't have those 2 factors in the vulnerability, it's a 50-50. Okay. Now, we still had to baseline in the same way. We still had to baseline that the worst you can be is a 9, the best you can be is a 3. And in order to do the 50-50, it's 4.5 for each, 3 for each, 1.5 for each. Okay. So what do we do with that information? Well, we're going to fill in each of these boxes with a number based on those weightings. So we're going to take several examples here just so you see where the numbers come from. We're starting here with a high vulnerability that has a CVE number. So it's what kind of vulnerability? It's a technical vulnerability. Okay. What did we say the weighting factors were going to be between the vulnerability and the actual customer input line? 2/3 for the vulnerability, 1/3 for the customer input. Okay. So if we have a high vulnerability, that's a technical vulnerability, and we have a high information type, okay, What's the value that we're dealing with in terms of the vulnerability input for this? So a high is worth, for the vulnerability, should be 6 for the vulnerability. And then the information type, or the customer information, should be worth a 3. 3 plus 6 is 9. Okay. Well, you can already see the pattern. If you've got red on red, it's always going to be a 9. Even if it's an organizational vulnerability, because this one's worth a 4.5, this is worth a 4.5, it's always going to be a 9. Okay. Where you start to see differentiation is when you get into the mediums areas. Okay. But a red on a red is always going to be 9. Or a high on a high is always going to be a 9. Okay. A technical vulnerability, still a high vulnerability, versus a medium impact. A medium information impact. Okay. This is still worth a what? Still worth a 6. Right? Still a technical vulnerability. The 2/3 weight is still 6 off of that. But the medium is now a what? For the top line. It was a 3 for a red. It's what for a yellow?
2.
It's a 2, based on the weighting. So, 6 plus 2 is 8. So, you're going to keep building this out. So, any red technical on a yellow information type is going to be an 8. Okay, let's do the low in this line. This is still worth a 6, right? But the green is worth a, what is it worth on the technical vulnerability?
For a critical?
For the customer input side.
Isn't it a 1?
It's a 1. Okay, off the weighting table. So 6 plus 1 is 7. And understand that the timeline, the IAM was created in 1997. The IEM was created at the end of 2002, beginning of 2003. So there's quite a gap when the two courses were created. And so this was decided then to bring in the IEM. Because now we are really trying to push the whole concept of your big security picture involves both. The implementation of both the assessment and the evaluation methodologies. And you can do them separate. Your best benefit is to do them together. Okay. All right, so again, just know where the numbers come from for now. So with any organizational one, you're going to use the 50-50 split. So the reason you have a 7.5 here is because this high is worth a 4.5 and a medium is worth a 3 on a non-technical vulnerability. And therefore, 4.5 plus 3 is 7.5. So that's where that number came from. Organizational findings, IAM type of findings are a little more subjective. That's why there's this differentiation in numbering and why we're using a different weighting. Is because of the subjectivity versus a little more objectivity with the technical findings. Okay. And of course, you don't do numbers on any boxes that are blank. And it's basically the same thing. Now, your expertise plays into this. If you have a number that pops up, you're always analyzing, right? You're looking, okay, what did I get? Yeah, makes sense. You know, for this vulnerability, this number really didn't come out right for what it really should be. So you can increase the numbers or decrease the numbers. But again, be very cautious with that because you're going to have to explain why. Or document why you would want to make a change like that. We try to do very few changes like that. The changes we'll make, we might reorder the vulnerabilities within these things more than we'll make this. But NSA said, your expertise plays such a critical role in this. You have the flexibility to make adjustments like this. Now, we're going to make pretty colors. Highs are going to be considered an 8 to a 9, medium a 5 to a 7.5, low is 3 to a 4.5. Then you plug in the colors. Of course, the more vulnerabilities you have, the more it'll actually segregate itself out. But again, the idea is all your high vulnerabilities are going to be up here. High vulnerabilities impacting high information categories or high impact areas for the customer. Mediums, and then the lows down toward the bottom. The more vulnerabilities, the more differentiation in the color you'll have. So if you have a customer, if all there is color, they're going to look at the top ones and say, well, what do we need to do to fix those? Let's just get those ugly red off of here. I don't like red. Okay? Well, we've got them prioritized. These are the things you can do. So that helps them to understand where they need to focus. Do the same thing for Snoop. So you do the systems first, then you do the organizational. You do an SVCM for all systems. You're going to do an OVCM, an overall for roll-up of all systems. Okay? If there are so many vulnerabilities that becomes unmanageable, you can partition out your OVCM so that it fits on the paper, fits on the slides, or whatever way you need to use them for. So you have some flexibility there. Sometimes you might even leave off the lows just from the aspect of manageability. Because it's really the reds and then the mediums that you have the most attention on up front. Okay. So now we get to pull together all of them into the OVCM, the overall. And you notice now we have all findings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So all the findings are going to be here. All the top line is going to be built in from the organizational chart. Then we do have an additional column that says which system is this affected by. Okay, so it says Snoop, Fax, Fax and Snoop, Fax and Snoop, Fax and Snoop. So vulnerabilities can reside on more than one system. And that may be one of the things you use to determine what priority do the highs go in. Or maybe that's something you use to determine if you changed any numbers in here. You know, yeah, it's on this one, and if it was just on that one, that number may make sense. But it's on 18 of 18 systems. Well, that's a multiple reoccurring thing. It may need to be a little higher priority. That's some of the expertise you can bring into this. And you're still going to color it out, and you're still going to leave the ones that don't apply blank. And so we have the full picture here with the coloring. Okay. Now we get into some trending concepts. The first one I'm introducing is the InfoSec Posture Profile. Okay, this is a scoring mechanism primarily used for organizations that deal with computer network defense. So the C&D concept. What you're going to get out of this is a score, but it's actually 4 scores. 4 scores based on protect, detect, respond, and sustain. You'll see how that rolls out in a minute. And it does bring together the findings from both IAM and IEM. And it's something that, yes, it kind of gives you a score today, but that score today doesn't mean a whole lot. It's really useful for trending, though. Tracking and trending, showing improvement, those types of things. Okay. It's not meant to be a comparison to anybody else. You can't use it to compare to anybody else because that top line that comes off of those is only for that organization. You built that specifically for that organization, so it can't apply to anybody else. So it's based on computer network defense, C&D. Protect, detect, respond, sustain. Protect basically means things like hardening and securing the components, doing things for protection. These are some of the IAM areas that are focused on protect. Okay, there were 18 IAM areas. There's a bunch of them here, so the majority of the 18 are fitting under protect. In the IEM, we have different types of measures that are in place. You know, yes, we're using the activities to test those measures, but these are just a sampling of the measures that would be considered from the IEM side. The detect side, very small list. Okay? Kind of the auditing. Our intrusion detection in the IAM was under auditing. Right? So small list, and even on the IEM, it's a small list as well. Respond, it's a small list as well. You know, incident response, contingency planning, disaster recovery, that's kind of response type of capability. And you know, a very generic term for IEM, which is reactive measures.
No.
And then the last one of these is sustain, which is a little bit longer of a list. Okay? But the reason you get 4 numbers is because of the size of these lists. All right. We've got, within these lists, the protect is very large, the detect is very small, respond is very small, sustain is kind of a medium size. So if you try to roll these up into one number, you're going to lose kind of where some of your issues might be. So you get 4 numbers. Okay, that was the IAM summary, and this is the IEM summary. Okay. So now, the InfoSec posture profile. You start with the overall vulnerability criticality matrix. You can also do one for each system. Okay, so you could actually do one for each system. We're just going to show it for the overall. So this is what we came up with for the overall. What we have to do is we have to go through and, through our analysis, I mentioned if you're using C and D, you need to include, is it a detect vulnerability, a protect vulnerability, a sustain vulnerability, or a respond vulnerability? So what kind of vulnerability is the vulnerability? And in this case, you do have to pick which one fits the profile. All right. So that's the summary of the IEM portion. Okay. You went through and you determined which of the C and D areas, detect, protect, respond, and sustain, apply within each of these areas. Okay. And so what we're going to be doing is just counting. Okay. So if you need your kids to come in and help you, that's fine. You go through and you count the number of high protect vulnerabilities that you have. How many high protect vulnerabilities did we have? 1. Okay. In our chart we have 1, so we just mark that down. How many medium protect vulnerabilities did we have?
None.
Medium.
Oh, protect? Oh, 2.
2. How many low protect vulnerabilities did we have?
1.
1. Okay. So in this case, it's a 1, 2, 1. We go through and we do the same thing for respond. Count the number of vulnerabilities. Go to do it for detect, and then do it for sustain. Whether they're high, medium, or low vulnerabilities. So all you're doing is counting at this point. Once you have that marked down, now we get to do a little bit more weighting. All right, so our weighting we're going to do for the IPP, InfoSec Posture Profile. Highs is going to be worth a 3, mediums are worth a 2, lows are worth a 1. Jeez. And all we're going to do now is multiply. And then add. So we counted, we're going to multiply, and then we're going to add. So under protect, we had 1 vulnerability that was a protect vulnerability. We're going to put our weighting factor in there, which was a 3 for a high. And so that's going to be 1 times 3 is a 3. For mediums, we had 2 of those vulnerabilities. It has a weighting factor of a 2. So 2 times 2, I hope it's still 4. For lows, we had 1 of those. It had a weighting factor of 1, so that's a 1. And then we just add these together. 3, 4, and 1, hopefully still make an 8. At one point it made a 7, but don't ask me why. So this becomes your IPP, or your InfoSec Posture Profile, for your protect category. You do the same thing for respond, detect, and sustain. It's just counting, adding the weighting factors, which is multiplying the weighting factors in, and then adding the totals together. So for this organization, which was COPS, they're going to have a protect of 8, a detect of 3, a respond of 4, and a sustain of 6. What does that mean the first time you do it? Absolutely nothing. This is something that's used for trending. The first time is a baseline. It's a snapshot. The next time around, if they're doing smart things, implementing improvements as they should, you should start to see these numbers go down.
Fix first.
The values are just a tracking mechanism. The table should help you determine what you fix first from a visualization standpoint. So that's the IPP. That's the InfoSec Posture Profile. Now, you're probably going to like this one better. Okay, this is the IPR, the InfoSec Posture Rating. All right, same type of concept. It's a trending mechanism. It's not meant for any other organization but your own. It brings in concepts, the vulnerabilities for the IAM and the IEM. It can help show progress toward improving. Okay? But it's based on an average this time. It's not based on this computer network defense stuff. So all we're doing, we're starting with the same OVCM. Okay, you can also do these for system specific, but our example is an OVCM. So you start here. You go through and you sum up all the values in the blocks. And you're going to divide it by the total number of blocks that have values in them. So for example, or another way to look at it too, you can count up all the highs, so all the ones that are red, which would be 9s and 8s, you can add all those together. The mediums, all the yellows, you can add all those together. Lows, all the greens, you can add those together. And we've checked the math a couple of times. It is 431. Or you can just add all the blocks up that have numbers in them. So this obviously doesn't count. These blank boxes don't count. Okay? And you're going to divide by the total number of boxes that have values in them. So again, you're eliminating the boxes that are not applicable. So in this one, we have a 10 by 9 matrix. Actually, it's a 10 by 9 matrix. Okay? 90 possible blocks.
But only 63 values.
27 of those blocks are blank, which gives us 63 blocks that have values. So that's what you're dividing by. And your IPR comes out, in this case, to 6.84. Okay? Now, you're not going to want to stand up in front of a customer and explain how you put all this together. Just send them to our class. Okay? Send your customers to our class. This is something you use to give a tool. You need to understand how the tool works. Yes, you'll have to give a brief explanation. And you can also use it. This is a tool that is provided for visualization, presentation, and a tracking and trending number. And it's based on NSA's methodology. For most people, they're going to be okay with that. It's a standard methodology, standard process. But you need to know how it works. And again, that's why NSA is not going to give you a tool that does this for you. You're going to have to build it yourself because you have to understand where the stuff came from and how it works. All right. Go through this process, add them all up, divide by the appropriate number, get a number. Well, what does that number mean? The first time you do it, it doesn't mean a whole lot, but it can mean a little bit. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay? But it gives us a number. It gives us a starting point, a baseline. And we tell them, this is where you're at. Worst you can be is a 9. The best you can be is a 3. You're at a 6.84. Well, where does that kind of put you? Well, if you put on, we call this a speedometer. If you put it on the speedometer, you can see that, as an overall average, you fit right in here right now. So you're not secure. And at the same time, you're not the worst you could be. Definitely areas to make improvement. And oh, by the way, here's our chart. And, we got a lot of red up here. We've got some concerns and issues in this area too. And this will help us to focus on those things that will work to bring this number down pretty quickly. Also, from a tracking trending perspective, if you use this type of visual concept, I put today's date right here. The next time I come back, I put another bar and put that date there. And they can see, oh, hey, I've improved. Look, my bar's gone down. So it's improving the posture as it tracks and trends. So what did we do? What we introduced to you was the concepts of system vulnerability criticality matrices, organizational vulnerability criticality matrices, the InfoSec posture profile, and the InfoSec posture rating. This is a way to show what you come up with for the customer in terms of where are their vulnerabilities. It can visualize some of the priorities that they need to focus on, and it can give them a score that can be used for tracking and trending over time.